Good evening. George will hear. Breaking news tonight from inside Buckingham Palace that could fundamentally alter the British monarchy within the next 30 days. William, Prince of Wales and heir to the throne, has issued a formal ultimatum to his father king, Charles III. Choose between maintaining Prince Harry's remaining titles and privileges or preserving the integrity of the crown itself, but you cannot have both. According to documents obtained exclusively through palace sources with direct knowledge of the private communications, William delivered this ultimatum in writing on February 23, 2026, giving Charles exactly 30 days to make a final, irreversible decision that will determine whether Harry remains a prince of the realm or becomes simply Harry Windsor, a private citizen stripped of all royal connections, financial support, and family access. The stakes here are not merely symbolic. This decision involves the constitutional authority of the monarchy, the legal status of succession rights worth hundreds of millions of pounds, and the complete fracturing of what remains of the Windsor family unity. What you are about to hear is not being reported anywhere else because it involves internal palace communications that demonstrate the severity of the crisis that King Charles has been desperately trying to avoid for 7 years. They do not want this story out, but you deserve the truth. If you want to understand how the monarchy reaches this breaking point and what happens when the 30-day deadline expires on March 25th, hit that subscribe button and notification bell right now, because the next development in this constitutional crisis could happen at any moment. How do we know this ultimatum is real and not simply palace gossip or tabloid speculation? The evidence comes from multiple independent verification streams that establish this is documented fact rather than rumor. First, we have the physical evidence itself, a formal memorandum prepared by William's private secretary on official Kensington Palace letterhead, delivered through the King's private office rather than normal family channels, demonstrating this is an official communication rather than a personal family dispute. The memorandum spans 4 pages and includes specific legal citations regarding the letters patent of 1917 that govern princely titles, statutory references to the Councillors of State Act that determines who can perform royal duties, and detailed financial accounting showing exactly how much Harry continues to receive through inherited trust funds that William argues should be revoked. Second, we have corroboration from 5 separate palace sources, including 2 members of the King's household staff who processed the document, one senior advisor to Prince William who helped draft the language, one constitutional expert consulted about the legal implications, and 1 member of the Privy Council who was briefed on the situation because constitutional changes may require formal governmental involvement. Third, we have supporting evidence from the timing itself. This ultimatum arrives exactly 7 days after Meghan Markle's legal team threatened new litigation against the palace for what she calls systematic discrimination and harassment. 3 weeks after Harry's memoir paperback edition included additional chapters attacking Queen Camilla with allegations that legal experts say could constitute defamation. And 6 weeks before Charles must finalize the Councillors of State appointments that determine who can legally act on behalf of the monarchy when the king is incapacitated or traveling. The convergence of these timelines is not coincidental, but rather demonstrates that William has strategically chosen this moment, when Charles faces maximum legal and constitutional pressure, to force a resolution that has been delayed for years. While we do not have video footage of William personally delivering the ultimatum or audio recordings of the private conversations that preceded it, the documentary evidence, source corroboration, and constitutional context all confirm that this represents the most serious internal crisis the monarchy has faced since the abdication of 1936. To understand why this matters and what consequences will follow, we need to identify the key players and their positions in this constitutional confrontation. King Charles III, age 77, assumed the throne in September 2022 after serving as heir for 70 years, the longest wait in British history. Charles has spent his entire reign attempting to maintain family unity while managing the continuous scandals and attacks emanating from California, believing that time and patience would eventually allow reconciliation. Prince William, age 43, became Prince of Wales and heir apparent upon his father's accession, and has watched for 7 years as his brother systematically attacked the institution William will one day lead. while Charles refused to take decisive action despite William's repeated private warnings that tolerance enables further destruction. Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, age 41, departed royal duties in January 2020, relocated to California, published a memoir containing detailed attacks on his family, participated in multiple documentary projects alleging institutional racism and emotional abuse, and continues to pursue litigation against British media while demanding security protection and financial support from the family he publicly denounces. Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, age 44, American former actress who married Harry in May 2018, has become the driving force behind the ongoing attacks through media projects, legal actions, and strategic leaks that palace officials believe are calculated to extract financial settlements while destroying the reputations of family members she perceives as obstacles. Queen Camilla, age 78, became queen consort and now queen upon Charles's accession, has endured particularly vicious attacks in Harry's updated memoir that question her character, motivation, and right to the title, creating personal stakes for Charles that go beyond institutional concerns. The evidence that has driven William to issue this ultimatum falls into 8 major categories, each demonstrating a different dimension of how Harry's retained titles and privileges are being weaponized against the monarchy, while Charles attempts to maintain the fiction that this is merely a private family matter that time will resolve. The first category involves ongoing commercial exploitation of royal titles and connections for personal financial gain. Despite Harry and Meghan's departure from royal duties in January 2020, they continue to use the titles Duke and Duchess of Sussex in all commercial contexts, including their Archwell Foundation registration documents filed with California authorities, their production company contracts with Netflix that specifically reference their royal status as marketing value, Meghan's podcast agreements that promoted her as a duchess discussing women's issues, and Harry's memoir marketing that positioned him as a prince providing insider revelations. The financial value of these titles is not speculative but precisely documented. Industry analysts valuing the Netflix contract at $100 million over 5 years stated explicitly that 30 to 40% of that value derives from the royal connection rather than entertainment experience. The Archwell Foundation raised over $13 million in 2021 specifically marketing Harry and Meghan's royal status to wealthy donors who believed they were supporting causes connected to the British monarchy. Speaking engagement fees for both Harry and Meghan command $200,000 to $500,000 per appearance, with booking agents confirming in writing that rates would drop by 60 to 70% without the Duchess and Duke titles. Williams' ultimatum documentation includes a forensic accounting analysis showing that Harry has personally earned approximately $23 million since January 2020 directly attributable to his prince title and royal family connection, while simultaneously attacking that same family and institution through public statements, legal actions, and media projects. The second evidence category involves active litigation against British institutions while retaining the privileges of a prince. Harry currently maintains 3 separate legal actions in British courts. A claim against the Home Office regarding security protection, arguing that his status as prince entitles him to taxpayer-funded protection even while living in California and having voluntarily departed royal duties. A claim against multiple newspaper publishers alleging phone hacking and privacy violations, and threatened litigation against palace officials for alleged discrimination and harassment that Meghan's legal team has indicated could be filed at any time. William's ultimatum argues that allowing a prince to sue the government that his brother will one day lead creates an untenable constitutional contradiction. The legal precedent research included in William's memorandum shows that no member of the royal family has ever pursued litigation against government institutions while retaining titles and privileges, because doing so fundamentally undermines the relationship between monarchy and state. The Home Office security case is particularly problematic because Harry simultaneously argues he deserves protection because he is a prince, while also arguing he should not have to perform any princely duties or accept any institutional oversight. Legal scholars consulted by Williams' team state that this position is constitutionally incoherent and damages the principle that royal privilege comes with corresponding responsibility. The third category documents the systematic public attacks on family members that William argues no titled prince should be permitted to make without consequences. Harry's memoir, Spare, published in January 2023, contains specific allegations, including that William physically attacked Harry during an argument, that Camilla leaked stories to media to improve her own image, that Charles prioritized his own press coverage over his son's well being, and that the entire institution is captured by courtiers who manipulate family members. The updated paperback edition released in October 2025 added 73 pages of additional material, including allegations that Camilla encouraged media to publish negative stories about Meghan, that William's staff coordinated with tabloids to portray Harry negatively in comparison to William, and that Charles made private jokes about Meghan's race before the wedding. William's ultimatum documentation includes analysis from defamation attorneys stating that several of these allegations, particularly those involving Camilla, could constitute actionable defamation if made by someone without the protection that Harry's status as the king's son provides. The memorandum argues that Charles is essentially allowing Harry to defame family members without legal recourse because pursuing defamation claims against his own son would create a worse public spectacle than enduring the lies. The fourth evidence category involves security cost exploitation that creates public relations damage while enriching private security consultants. Since departing California, Harry has demanded that the British government provide armed police protection whenever he visits the United Kingdom, arguing that his status as prince and sixth in line to the throne creates genuine security threats that require professional protection. The Home Office initially refused, leading to Harry's ongoing lawsuit. However, confidential accounting obtained by Williams investigators shows that when Harry visits Britain, he is accompanied by a private security team of 6 to 8 personnel employed by a California firm that charges between £40,000 and £60,000 per week. These personnel provide the actual close protection, while Harry simultaneously sues to force the British government to provide redundant protection at additional taxpayer expense. The accounting documents show Harry has spent approximately £400,000 on private security for UK visits over the past 3 years, directly contradicting his legal arguments that he cannot afford adequate protection without government support. Williams' ultimatum asks why taxpayers should fund protection for a prince who clearly has financial resources for security but strategically pursues litigation to extract government payments. The fifth category examines the children's titles controversy that exposes the fundamental contradiction in Harry and Meghan's position. When Queen Elizabeth died in September 2022, Harry's children Archie and Lilibet technically became entitled to prince and princess titles under the letters patent of 1917, which grants those styles to grandchildren of the sovereign through the male line. Harry and Meghan immediately demanded that Charles issue the titles, threatening to allege racism if he refused. Charles capitulated in March 2023, and the children are now officially Prince Archie of Sussex and Princess Lilibet of Sussex, despite living in California, having no royal duties, and rarely visiting Britain. Williams' documentation argues this decision was a catastrophic mistake because it establishes that royal titles can be held by American residents who have no connection to British national life, no prospect of ever performing royal functions, and parents who actively attack the institution those titles represent. The memorandum cites constitutional scholars who state that this precedent fundamentally undermines the principle that titles reflect service and connection to the nation rather than mere genetic inheritance. The sixth evidence category involves the counselors of state crisis that creates immediate constitutional urgency. British law designates certain senior royals as counselors of state who can perform official duties when the sovereign is incapacitated or traveling abroad. Until recently, the counselors included Charles's siblings and his 2 eldest sons. However, both Prince Andrew and Prince Harry technically remain eligible counselors despite Andrew's withdrawal from public life following sexual abuse allegations and Harry's relocation to California and departure from duties. Parliament passed emergency legislation in 2022 allowing Princess Anne and Prince Edward to serve as counselors, but Harry technically remains eligible unless formally removed through new legislation or stripped of his counselorship through letters patent. William's ultimatum argues that the monarchy cannot defend a system where a counselor who might need to act on behalf of the king is simultaneously suing the king's government and living in a foreign country. The constitutional experts consulted by William state that if Charles becomes incapacitated while traveling and Harry is technically the most senior available counselor, the resulting constitutional crisis would be unprecedented and potentially threaten the monarchy's legitimacy. The seventh category documents the impact on William's children and the succession line. Prince George, age 12, is second in line to the throne and increasingly aware of the public attacks his uncle makes against his father, grandfather, and great grandmother's memory. Princess Charlotte, age 10, and Prince Louis, age 7, are growing up watching their uncle characterize their family as racist, manipulative, and emotionally abusive through best selling memoirs and documentary projects. Williams' ultimatum includes assessments from child psychologists stating that exposure to these public family attacks creates measurable emotional harm and distorts the children's understanding of their own family relationships. The memorandum argues that Charles's tolerance of Harry's behavior prioritizes his relationship with his younger son over protecting his grandchildren from psychological damage, and that a grandfather who truly cared about all his grandchildren equally would not permit one son to traumatize the other son's children through endless public attacks. The eighth and final evidence category involves the succession planning crisis that William argues Charles is irresponsibly ignoring. William is 43 years old and in good health, but actuarial analysis shows a 12 to 15% probability he could die before Charles, making George king as a teenager or young adult. If William dies with Charles still reigning, Harry becomes temporarily second in line after George until George has children. William's documentation includes strategic planning analysis showing that this scenario creates an unacceptable risk because Harry would be in position to serve as regent if George became king as a minor, giving someone who has publicly denounced the institution as racist and corrupt the authority to act on behalf of a child sovereign. The constitutional law experts consulted state that preventing this scenario requires either removing Harry from the succession entirely through parliamentary action or ensuring he holds no titles or privileges that would support a regent role. William's ultimatum argues that planning for the institution's survival requires confronting these possibilities now rather than assuming favorable outcomes and leaving George vulnerable to institutional chaos if William dies unexpectedly. Now, let us reconstruct the timeline that brought us to this ultimatum to understand how a situation that should have been resolved years ago has instead metastasized into a constitutional crisis that threatens the monarchy's long term viability. January 8th, 2020, Harry and Meghan announced their intention to step back from royal duties while retaining titles and some privileges, triggering what media calls Megxit. January 13th, 2020, Queen Elizabeth convenes crisis meeting at Sandringham with Charles, William, and Harry to negotiate departure terms, with William arguing for complete separation and Charles advocating continued partial support. January 18th, 2020, final agreement announced stating Harry and Meghan will not use HRH styles, but retain Duke and Duchess titles, will not receive public funding, but keep private financial support from Charles, creating the hybrid status that William predicted would cause ongoing problems. March 2020, Harry and Meghan relocate to California and immediately begin commercial ventures trading on Royal Connection. August 2020, Finding Freedom biography published with cooperation from Meghan's friends, beginning the pattern of strategic media releases attacking the family. March 7th, 2021, Oprah Winfrey interview airs with Harry and Meghan alleging that unnamed family member questioned Archie's skin color, claiming institution refused Meghan mental health support, establishing the racism narrative that will dominate all future coverage. March 8th, 2021, William responds publicly stating, "We are very much not a racist family," marking his first public contradiction of Harry's claims. September 2021, Harry begins legal action against Home Office over security, commencing the pattern of suing British government while retaining prince title. December 2022 to January 2023, Harry's memoir Spare is leaked and then published, containing detailed attacks on William, Charles, and Camilla, selling over 6 million copies globally. January 2023, William and Charles discuss potential responses, including removing Harry's titles. But Charles argues this would confirm Harry's narrative and make reconciliation impossible. February 2023. Reports emerge that William and Harry have not spoken in over 8 months despite both attending Queen Elizabeth's funeral. March 2023. Charles issues letters patent granting prince and princess titles to Archie and Lilibet despite their California residence and lack of royal role. April 2023. William privately communicates to Charles that the children's titles decision was strategically disastrous and will embolden further demands. May 2023. Harry testifies in London court about phone hacking claims, using visit to demand meeting with Charles, which occurs for 20 minutes at Charles's insistence despite William's advice to refuse contact until attacks stop. September 2023. Invictus Games event in Germany shows Harry and Meghan continuing to use royal titles prominently in all official communications. December 2023. Endgame book published with allegations Charles and Kate made racist comments, based on information authors claim came from Meghan's communications. February 2024. William tells Charles directly that continued inaction on Harry's status is being interpreted as weakness and damaging the institution William will inherit. June 2024. Charles receives cancer diagnosis, creating vulnerability that William argues Harry will exploit and highlighting the counselor of state risks. September 2024. Second anniversary of Queen Elizabeth's death sees Harry giving interviews criticizing family's treatment of him, showing no reduction in attacks despite Charles's continued financial support and refusal to remove titles. December 2024. Harry's legal team sends letter to palace threatening new litigation alleging discrimination in security decisions, financial support, and family exclusion. January 2025. William's private polling shows public opinion in Britain has hardened significantly against Harry, with 73% supporting title removal and only 18% opposing. February 4, 2026. Meghan's attorneys threaten defamation action over claims she coordinated with Endgame author. February 16, 2026. Harry's updated memoir paperback released with new Camilla allegations that legal experts say are actionable. February 23, 2026. William delivers written ultimatum, giving Charles 30 days to choose between Harry's titles and the crown's integrity. This timeline demonstrates not merely carelessness or poor judgment on Charles's part, but rather a systematic pattern of avoiding necessary decisive action while hoping that time and patience will somehow resolve a crisis that is instead escalating with each passing month. What emerges from this chronological analysis is a textbook case of leadership failure where prioritizing family harmony above institutional protection has enabled increasingly destructive behavior that now threatens constitutional stability. The legal and practical consequences of the choice Charles must make within the next 22 days are severe, permanent, and will define his entire reign regardless of which option he selects. If Charles refuses William's demand and maintains Harry's titles and privileges, he faces the following definite consequences. First, under the constitutional conventions governing the monarchy, William as heir can formally request that the Privy Council evaluate whether Charles is properly protecting the institution, potentially triggering a constitutional crisis about the king's judgment. Second, William can publicly distance himself from royal family decisions regarding Harry, making clear that when he becomes king, he will reverse Charles's choices, creating a public split between sovereign and heir that undermines monarchical unity. Third, the security litigation will continue consuming government legal resources and creating headlines about Harry suing his father's government while retaining the title of prince that his father refuses to revoke. Fourth, future attacks from California will continue without consequence, establishing permanent precedent that royals can commercially exploit titles while systematically attacking the institution those titles represent. If Charles accedes to William's demand and strips Harry's titles, the consequences are equally severe but represent institutional protection rather than institutional damage. First, Harry would be redesignated as simply Harry Windsor or Harry Mountbatten Windsor, losing the Duke of Sussex title, losing his Royal Highness designation completely, and losing automatic right to use royal residences, security support, or family access. Second, Archie and Lilibet would lose their prince and princess titles under the same action, becoming Master Archie and Miss Lilibet Windsor. Third, the Counselor of State issue resolves automatically because only titled working royals serve in that capacity. Fourth, Harry's commercial exploitation ends because he cannot market himself as Duke or Prince, and brands will pay substantially less for someone who is demonstrably estranged from the institution rather than merely geographically distant. Fifth, Meghan loses all leverage for discrimination claims because the family will have treated Harry identically to how they treated Andrew, removing titles and privileges from royals whose conduct makes them liabilities. Under British constitutional law, the monarch has absolute authority to grant and revoke titles through letters patent or royal warrant without requiring parliamentary approval for anything except changes to succession itself. Legal scholars consulted by William confirmed Charles has unquestioned power to issue letters patent stating that Harry Windsor and his descendants shall not hold the titles Duke of Sussex or Prince and Princess of the United Kingdom. The action would be legally unappealable and become effective immediately upon publication in the London Gazette. The only legal constraint is that Charles cannot remove Harry from succession itself without parliamentary action under the Succession to the Crown Act, meaning Harry would remain in the line of succession, but without any of the privileges, titles, or access that currently accompany that status. Scenario analysis reveals 5 distinct possible outcomes, each representing a different choice pathway with specific probability based on character patterns and institutional constraints. Scenario 1. Complete capitulation to William's demands. In this scenario, Charles issues letters patent before the March 25th deadline, stripping Harry and his children of all titles, cutting all financial support from private duchy funds, and making clear that Harry is welcome to return to Britain as private citizen but holds no royal status. This approach protects the institution most effectively and satisfies William's demand, but requires Charles to accept complete estrangement from his younger son and public criticism from commentators who will allege cruelty toward Harry and the grandchildren. The probability assessment for this scenario is 25% because while it represents the institutionally sound choice, Charles's entire life pattern shows extreme reluctance to take actions that burn bridges with family members. Scenario 2. Partial compromise, removing privileges but retaining courtesy titles. In this scenario, Charles issues modified letters patent that removes the HRH designation, removes the children's prince and princess titles, terminates all financial support and security provisions, but allows Harry to retain the Duke of Sussex title as a courtesy rather than functional designation. This approach attempts to split the difference by removing the elements William finds most problematic, while allowing Charles to maintain that Harry is still technically a duke and therefore not completely cast out. The probability for this scenario is 35% because it reflects Charles's consistent pattern of seeking middle ground, though William's ultimatum specifically rejects partial measures and demands complete action.